Welcome. This is Alchemancer, Volume 1, Sins of Your Fathers. Written and read by Todd Shackley. To everyone who believed in me and told me that I could write a book, I'm thrilled to admit you were right. I love you all. Prologue. Good night, sweet prince. Rain pelted Salatra. Even inside her poncho, her fur was already soaked through. Lightning flashed behind her, casting her canid reflection in the glass she clung to. Thunder cracked a moment later, and Salatra flinched despite herself. It was a foolish reaction, she knew. She'd grown up in Cyphus. The capital's lightning rod drew every strike within the bulb without exception. She knew that logically. That still didn't make her feel any less nervous about climbing the outside of a metal high-rise on a storm day. A comforting blue glow shone through the reaction window of the gloves on Salatra's climbing suit. She'd included traces of Fyrum, so they would glow red when the reaction was running low. There was no red showing yet. She did the mental calculations anyway. Gripping her sleeve in her teeth, she slid it back far enough to check her wristwatch. She had already been climbing for nearly 10 minutes. If she'd gotten her mixtures right, that gave her 6 more minutes. If she was off, that could be as few as 4. Maybe less. She was expecting red when she was down to 2 minutes. Cold rain drove into her face as she risked a glance upwards. Her goal, the 22nd floor, was just ahead. Redirecting the electrical magic flowing through her climbing suit, she disengaged the electromagnet in the palm of her glove, freeing her hand from the wall. She reached up to the next metal crossbeam before powering the electromagnet again, sticking her hand firmly. She repeated this with each limb in succession, the world's slowest spider crawling up the world's largest waterspout. Being washed out from this height could be fatal. Wind ripped around her poncho, the scheduled evening thunderstorm threatening to tear her free. Yes, she had several Aurum crystals ready, but she hoped they would remain a last resort. She needed them for her exit. Salatra's gloves glowed red as she reached her goal. The windows of the 22nd floor spread out in both directions. She could see the table and chairs of a large conference room within. The room's door was open, showing a darkened hall beyond. That would work. Security would be present, but was supposed to be much thinner this high up the tower. Unclamping one glove from the building, she reached for her alchemical pouch. Before she could fish out an aquam crystal, she spotted a light moving in the hallway. No time to wait for them to wander off. Her current reaction was running on fumes. She had to find a new entry point. Detaching her boots, Salatra relied on her arms as she shimmied sideways along the top of the window frame. She froze as the source of light reached the conference room. A lone, sneppered security guard peeked into the room, the whiskers on his feline face twitching as he checked the room by the dim glow of a Fyrum torch. The handheld device emitted a beam of faint orange light that flickered as it moved. His beam stopped just shy of where it would have illuminated her, and she breathed out a sigh of relief as the guard left the doorway and returned to his patrol. The intensity of red peeking through her suit's reaction window was growing. She could swap electrum crystals, but that felt like a waste. You couldn't stop a reaction once you'd started it. Best to save those for her exit, in case things went south. She still had time. Probably. Choosing to trust the math, she continued her shimmy, arriving at a window to a much smaller office. Her time to be selective about entry points had come and gone. De-electrifying a glove, she grabbed an aquam crystal and smashed it against the slick glass. The reaction was immediate, a burst of blue and white light forming beneath her palm. Despite the rain pelting her sensitive nose and the uncomfortable cold of pressing her hand against an aquam reaction, Salatra focused her will with the precision of a surgeon. She felt the cold embrace of water magic wash against her senses. The energy wanted a place to go. It wanted to disperse, to join the raindrops around it. Salatra held on to it, feeling her hand start to go numb. Though she constrained the magic, she also redirected it. It listened to her will. Ice spread out from the broken crystal to cover the window. More importantly, it sapped heat from the window at an incredible rate. Raindrops froze as they struck the icy surface. Warmth returned to Salatra's hand as she pulled it away from the window. Having received her direction, the magic would continue to work until the energy of the aquam reaction was fully spent. There was dangerously little blue left visible through the reaction window in her glove. Reaching into her alchemical pouch, she grabbed an aurum crystal. Positioning it between her teeth, she braced her feet against the icy glass. The electromagnets in her gloves held her to the window frame for now, but their energy source was almost depleted. She bit down into the crystal, tasting sand as it shattered. A rush of wind pushed against her cheeks and tongue, seeking escape. Focusing her will into containing the wind magic, she kept it trapped in her mouth for now. She only needed a few seconds. Kicking off the frozen glass, her body swung backwards, hinging where her hands still stuck to the metal frame. For that brief moment, she was weightless, caught between her own momentum sending her one way and gravity pulling her back the other. She knew better than to look down from this height. Keeping her eyes on the window, she felt gravity pull her back towards it. She willed a shape into the wind magic, then released the energy. It formed behind her, pressing into her back with an incredible gusting force. Her booted feet slammed into the frozen window, which shattered inward in a shower of frost, rain, and glass. Not a moment too soon, as her electrum reaction ran out. The gloves detached from the window frame, and her momentum carried her inside the room. Salatra bounced off the top of the desk, scattering pens, papers, and several picture frames. She hit the floor, and a coffee mug shattered beside her. She groaned. That had been unnecessarily close. Yes, electrum crystals were a pain to prepare in such large quantities, but maybe next time it would be worth over-preparing. Sitting up, she checked herself. Her leg was a bit bruised from the impact, but not enough to warrant the use of a curum crystal. Better to save those for the fight ahead. From the information she'd been given, Lortrin's personal security staff was well armed. Water dripped from her poncho hood, bouncing off her nose and tickling her whiskers. Cold glass crunched beneath her as she got back to her feet. Normally she hated wearing boots, but today she was glad to have them. With as much glass as she tended to break these days, it would be nice to skip the need to pick glass shards out of her foot pads when she got home. Salatra's tail drooped under the water weight. Gripping the poncho, she shook herself vigorously. Water came off, but it didn't really help. Besides, she was going to leave a trail tonight, whether she wanted to or not. She sniffed at her arm. The result wasn't quite wet dog, but it was still... ugh. Fresh rain had done little to dampen how much she reeked of sweat. A small mirror on the desk drew her attention, confirming that she looked about as flattering as she smelled. Her dark hair was so saturated with rain, it looked greasy as it disappeared inside her hood. Her russet and charcoal fur laid flat against her skin, exposing her sleek, canid muscle and cheeks gone sallow with months of grief and anxiety. Seed mother, she was a mess. A faint, prismatic glow danced inside her electric blue irises, like light shone through windows made of sapphire. It was the only indicator of any life and vibrancy left inside her. It didn't flicker. It didn't waver. Salatra would do what needed to be done, no matter the risk, no matter the cost. After months of this fanina, she hardly recognized herself. But her family? Her ears perked up underneath her poncho as a voice called out from the hall. Hello? Sneppards had excellent hearing, even better than hers. That was a problem. She'd hoped that the thunderstorm outside was providing enough ambient noise that the guards wouldn't hear her breaking the glass. No such luck. The orange glow of a fireroom torch licked at the doorway. Reaching down into her alchemical pouch, Salatra removed her combat belt and fastened it around her waist. Little loops held a selection of dozens of crystals, all 7 types, each one packaged in a paper cartridge no larger than a bullet. Salatra could feel her adrenaline slipping, and with it, her focus and clarity. That was also a problem. Fishing around in a side pocket of her pouch, she came out with a small metal canister that fit in her palm. She bit the tip off the end of the bottle of compressed prism, breathing in deep as the dense aerosol filled her lungs. Sharpened focus and clarity returned in a familiar rush, her body welcoming the substance it had grown up with. Footsteps neared the room Salatra was hiding in. Tossing the empty prism canister aside, she drew her catalyst, a small bismuth handgun. It was a break barrel, designed for activating a reaction in a single crystal at a time, a tool her mentor had given her in the vain hope that Salatra would remember safety while weaponizing magic. Flipping the latch at the top, she snapped the barrel open. A small blue crystal rattled around inside, the other reason she'd had so little electrum to spare for the ascent. She wanted to stay as non-lethal tonight as possible. One casualty was already going to be too many, but her hands were tied. The alternative was absolutely a non-option. Reassured that she had in fact remembered to load her catalyst this time, Salatra snapped the barrel closed and stepped out into the hallway. The guard raised his torch in time to see her already firing. At her will, electricity shot forward, its blue, grasping fingers striking the guard in the chest. The sneppered man's rounded triangular ears laid flat, and the snow-gray fur on his long, tube-like tail frizzed out in all directions as he convulsed. His cry of alarm cut off as he collapsed to the ground. The firearm torch he'd been carrying hit the floor and rolled, coming to a stop against the wall and casting the hallway in a flickering orange glow. Breaking the barrel of her catalyst open, Salatra dumped the remnants of the spent crystal cartridge out on the floor before reloading a fresh electrum crystal. Eyes forward, she stepped over the unconscious body of the feline guard. Ignoring the conference room she'd seen earlier, Salatra headed for the heart of the high-rise. A flash of lightning briefly painted her shadow across the hallway floor. The thunderclap followed on its heels, something most citizens of Cyphus were conditioned to. The lightning rod was installed in the center of the bulb, so it wasn't like there was that far for the sound to travel anyway. Maybe 10 miles to the city outskirts at best. The soft touch of forced air brushed her as she passed beneath a vent. The modern conveniences that a member of the 13 could afford were astounding. Carefully controlled air temperatures to regulate an entire building? Even the university didn't spring for employee luxuries like that. No wonder Lortrin was such a popular employer. Hopefully, her actions tonight wouldn't trigger a wave of unemployment. She didn't need the weight of starving families on her already burdened conscience. Despite the overpowering wet smell she herself was exuding, another scent reached her. More sneppards ahead. Either she was approaching a high-traffic area, or she had found something worth stationing multiple guards. The hallway opened up on her right, and she crept up to the corner. Peering around, she saw that it was a case of both. The hall opened into a large, well-lit sitting area, with long leather couches and small glass tables strewn with newspapers and popular magazines. Several sneppered guards lounged on one of the couches, chatting in hushed tones. Salatra wrinkled her nose at another scent she hadn't quite placed before. The cigar in one guard's hand was undoubtedly responsible. Necro smoke had a way of trapping itself in one's fur. Even without high-powered noses like hers, how could these cats stand it? Beyond the three loafing on the couch, 2 more stood guard at an elevator door, the entrance to Lortrin's penthouse, her destination. The instructions had been clear. Whatever she did tonight, it had to be clear alchemy was involved. No chance of having it spun as malfunctioning tech or guards gone rogue. Her eyes traced over the guards, noting the rifles slung from shoulder straps or laid out on couch cushions. Electrum batons hung from several waists. This was not a fight she could engage on their terms. Flickering lights overhead sparked an idea. Heading back the way she had come, her eyes traced the electrum lights. There would be a central electrum panel for this floor somewhere. The wiring was easy to trace, and she followed it back to a small closet. It was locked. Swapping out the loaded electrum cartridge for an aquam one, she placed the bismuth barrel against the keyhole. As the water magic formed, Salatra seized it with her mind, spending some of the prism in her system to guide it into the keyhole. Connected to it so intimately, she could feel increased pressure in spots where the water pressed against tumblers. Commanding the majority of the water to form ice, Salatra twisted the catalyst until it caught on the tumblers. She continued undulating the part that was still liquid, pressing up on the tumblers until they were aligned. With a satisfactory click, her ice pick unlocked the door. She smacked the end of the catalyst with a fist, snapping the ice pick off in the door. It would melt in a minute or two, Passing a number of janitorial supplies, she found the electrum panel at the back. She opened it, casting the small room in Electrum's signature lightning blue glow. To her disappointment, these were industrial batteries, as evidenced by the thick metal casing shielding the more fragile electrum crystals inside. That meant she couldn't harness the electrum's magic for her own alchemancy without a catalyst specifically designed to work with batteries. Worse, because the reaction inside had already started, it would dissipate before she could take the thing home and extract the electrum inside. She swiped a few spare batteries off the shelf to extract later, then threw the hammer bar on the side of the electrum panel. Immediately, all the lights on the 22nd floor went out. Now that the circuit had been closed, she could touch the batteries without being electrocuted. Even so, the fur on her fingers still stood on end inside her glove as she yanked the first one free. The active battery produced enough of an ambient electromagnetic field that it stuck to the magnet in her glove, though the attraction was weak, and it came free with a firm tug. After pocketing the last of the batteries, Salatra stepped back into the hall. It was very dark now, but her eyes started to adjust as she moved. The city's ambient lighting outside meant that a building with this many windows wasn't completely dark, but it was still dark enough that she tripped over a potted plant by the wall. She awkwardly hopped the next couple steps on one foot and barely kept herself from falling over. Each flash of lightning only brought a burst of illumination as she moved forward, like trying to navigate using the flash of a camera. Ahead, she saw the telltale orange flicker of firing torches. She could hear a whispered exchange from down the hall, but wasn't close enough to pick out any words. A pair of torches rounded the corner ahead, and Salatra barely had time to duck into a nearby office.
"What was that?"
one of the guards asked in a nervous hiss. Booted footsteps approached with slow deliberation. I don't know. But you know how to fire that thing, right? The gun? Of course I know how to fire the gun, Jax. I made it through basic training. I'm not a security native. Salatra bristled at the word, despite herself. Native. It came out so casually for most people. She'd grown up in Cyphus, so one might think she should be desensitized to the term by now. It was a sign of the city's eternal unwillingness to recognize her people as, well, people. If something jumps me, you've got my back, right? Guard 1 asked. Salatra quietly slipped a pair of cartridges from her belt. One Firum, one Aquam. Clutching them in one hand, she rubbed her thumb along the uneven, crystalline surfaces, other hand grasping her bismuth catalyst in a firm grip. Flickering torchlight was spilling into her doorway now. If you've got my back, then why's your safety still on, genius? You sure you're not part native? The first guard cursed, and the torchlight in the hall whipped off to the side. Seizing the opportunity, Salatra broke safe practice again, snapping the ends of the cartridges in her hand like breaking chalk. Acrid sulfur met her nose as her hand was flooded with equal amounts of intense heat and intense cold. Both hurt. She focused on the raw elemental energies swirling millimeters from her glove, willing them to stay cohesive while she gave them direction. An angry, hot mist formed above her hand, and she pushed it out into the hall. It hung there, a large bubble of steam swirling just outside the door, glowing with a faint Firum aura. "Someone there?" one of the guards called. Hand still slightly numbed from the shock of proximity to both extreme heat and cold, Salatra removed several Aurum cartridges from her belt. She popped one into her mouth. Her teeth ground sand as she bit down, air trying to escape her mouth in all directions. This time, she let it out almost immediately, willing it to travel down the hall. It caught the bubble of scalding steam, washing it over the two approaching guards. They both screamed in surprise and pain, and Salatra launched herself into the hallway. Lifting her catalyst, she aimed at the closest guard and fired. The hammer cracked into the loaded electrum crystal, and Salatra snatched onto the reaction's energy with her mind. Then she focused it into a bolt of concentrated electricity that slammed into the guard's chest. His fur immediately poofed out into a gray and white dandelion puff, and he fell to the ground, convulsing. The other guard was still clutching his face, waving an arm, though the steam had already dispersed. Salatra ran straight for him, crushing the next Aurum cartridge in her hand. Her fingers tried to blow open right away, wind energy from the Aurum reaction desperately wanting to disperse. Focusing her will, she used more prism to keep the magic condensed at her palm. Opening her fingers, she grabbed the second guard's face by his stubby feline muzzle as she passed, pulling him off balance. As he fell, she released the Aurum energy, which slammed against the man's face like a shock wave. He was flung downwards, head hitting the floor with an audible crack. His gun clattered beside him, safety finally off. Silatra reloaded her catalyst with another electrum cartridge as she ran. Then she popped an Aurum cartridge into each cheek. She could get away with storing those in her mouth, as wind magic wouldn't run the risk of scalding or freezing her tongue in the same way Fyrum or Aquam would. The only thing you had to be careful of was the pressure change that came from an Aurum reaction. If you set off an Aurum reaction in your mouth with empty lungs, well, you were likely to burst them from the sudden influx, even if you got your mouth open right away. The key was to take a deep breath and maintain pressure. Or you could be a normal, sane person who followed proper alchemical safety protocols and not start any of the 7 major alchemical reactions in your mouth. Most alchemists use catalysts for their reactions. Silatra didn't always have time to utilize that luxury. But that was also part of the thrill of alchemancy. If the innate danger didn't get the blood and adrenaline pumping, was it even worth doing? She reached the sitting room with the elevator to find the other 3 guards still there. The 2 by the door remained at the door, but the third one had abandoned his cigar and was now nervously looking her way. All 3 had Fyrum torches fixed to the bottom of their rifles, though the orange flickering light did little to help illuminate the darkness blanketing such a large open space. Silatra ducked her head and entered the room. She had taken only 3 steps when a flash of lightning burst into the room like a Fyrum flare. The guard closest to her cried out in alarm as he spotted her in the flash. Lifting his rifle, he opened fire. Silatra threw herself to the ground, crunching one of the Aurum cartridges between her teeth, and using the wind magic it produced to push herself behind the nearest couch. As the reaction's energy died, she spit the empty cartridge out, her tongue feeling caked with sand by this point. She replaced it with a fresh Aurum cartridge a moment later. The guard fired a few more shots into the couch, bullets tearing through the leather like paper. One bullet exited mere inches from her shoulder, ricocheting off the floor and embedding in a nearby wall. "Come out where we can see you," the guard ordered. One of the guards by the elevator growled, "You're supposed to say that before you start shooting, Gurn. Now you're gonna owe the boss a new couch." Peeking under the couch, Silatra could see that all 3 guards were facing her now. She had no doubt all guns were trained on her. Well, why make the poor guard liable for the couch, if it was going to need to be replaced anyway? Reaching into her alchemical pouch, Silatra grabbed a Fyrum crystal the size of her thumb. This was the kind of thing with enough energy to power an incendiary grenade. Did she need to use it now? Probably not, but she needed the guards to keep their distance, and she was dying for the chance to test it anyway. Gripping the dark orange crystal in both hands, she twisted it with a loud crack, starting a very volatile and dangerous reaction. She reached out to the energy with her mind, willing it to stay in the crystal for just a moment longer. The leaking sulfur smell told her it wouldn't stay in long. Even through her glove, the heat was intense. Reaching under the couch, she focused the energy upwards. She dropped the crystal as soon as the fire erupted, but it still singed her glove. Then the couch burst into flame. Silatra's hand was already back in her alchemical pouch as the guards cried out in alarm. She withdrew a large Aurum crystal, one of 3 she kept on hand in case she needed it to help recover from a freefall. The energy of the wind magic inside had more than enough force to throw multiple people off their feet. The horrid smell of burning leather and couch cushion assaulted her nostrils, and the couch fire lit up the room far more effectively than any of the guards' torches had. Gripping the tan Aurum crystal in both hands, she slammed it down into the tile floor. The tile cracked, but the crystal did not. She struck it again, then again. On the 4th hit, a crack formed, and the crystal filled with a warm light. The wind energy inside screamed for release as the reaction began. It needed an outlet, a way to bleed off the instant increase in pressure. Silatra focused, willing the energy to wait inside until it received her command. The crack spread. It wouldn't wait long. With a grunt, she tossed the crystal over the couch like a grenade. In a manner of speaking, it was a grenade, just not a traditional one. Ducking back behind the couch, she screwed her eyes shut and used her hands to pin her long ears flat to her head. The shockwave rolled over her as the crystal exploded. The magic within instantly changed the pressure in the room with a force that still threatened to pop Silatra's eardrums, despite covering her ears. It would be substantially worse for the Sneppard guards, who had far more sensitive hearing than she did. Besides that, it had landed at their feet, not hers. The wave of high pressure pushed her along the tile floor, even causing the flaming couch to skid several feet. Nearby doors were flung open, and she heard objects and hopefully guards hitting walls. The pressure wave dissipated quickly as the Aurum components were consumed by the reaction. It still left a weight that pressed against her eardrums, dulling her hearing. She pushed to her feet, raising her catalyst and peering over the couch. All three guards lay slumped on the ground. One had left a dent in the elevator door. Another had hit the wall, his rifle embedded in the drywall itself. The third had hit the floor, skidding to a stop before hitting any walls. This one groaned, clutching at the ears atop his head uselessly. Silatra shot him with an electrum cartridge as she passed. He convulsed, fluffed out, then went still. Swiping a badge off the guard nearest the elevator, she called it down to this floor. The door creaked as it arrived, opening to an empty elevator. Electrum light spilled out from inside, a brighter hue than the light of the couch fire. Stepping inside, she hit the button for the 30th floor. Cheery music played through speakers embedded in the walls. It was simplistic, repetitive, and a little too dependent on brass instruments. Nothing like the soothing strings her husband used to bring to life. A mirror to the side showed how much of a sopping mess she was. In the moment of forced calm, her senses started to catch up to her. Her ears were still sore from the localized microburst she'd formed. Her hand had definitely burned through the glove with the couch fire stunt. And she'd bruised her shoulder diving behind the couch in the first place. With a sigh, Silatra dumped the spent electrum cartridge from her catalyst. Checking her belt, she only had 3 of those left. Plucking a Curum cartridge instead, she loaded the catalyst and pressed the barrel to her shoulder. The familiar warmth of healing magic washed over her shoulder, easing the pain out of the muscles. Healing magic was the slowest burning of the 7 main alchemical reactions, but thankfully this treatment didn't take long. It was a light bandage to a light injury. She just didn't want the bruise to distract her if she used the arm. Unfortunately, she didn't have time to fix her hand. She had a feeling she was going to injure it worse before the night was through anyway. The edges of her vision were losing their sharpness. She'd used most of the prism in her system for directing the 2 reactions behind the couch fire and the microburst. From a materials perspective, tonight was proving to be expensive. Still, she'd been instructed to make a scene, so the extravagant use wasn't completely unwarranted. Dangerous and wasteful, yes, but certainly memorable. Why had she lit the couch on fire? The scientist in her provided the answer, to see if she could. Letting out a snort at such a youthful response, she fished another bottle of prism from the pouch pocket where she kept them. Biting into the tip, she breathed in another concentrated dose. The mental muddiness slipped away, and she discarded the empty bottle. Horrific grinding railed against her still muffled hearing as the elevator shuddered to a stop. The display read 28. Holstering her catalyst, she let out a soft growl. She was so close. This nightmare was almost over. And yet, part of her was happy for the delay. She knew the job she'd been given, but that didn't mean she was looking forward to doing it. This wasn't the career she'd chosen for herself. The elevator's cheery music and internal lighting both cut out. Reaching up, she felt around where she'd remembered spotting the access hatch. She found it and swung it open a moment later. This might have been the first time she'd ever been glad something had been designed with Sneppards in mind. It meant a Nulf like her could reach the hatch without jumping. Cables creaked as Silatra climbed on top of the elevator. Peering up, she saw light poking through a sliver of a gap in the door she needed, 2 floors up. Since they'd stopped the elevator, they obviously knew she was coming. This had to be a trap. And yet, she wasn't in the mood for anything other than the most direct route. Did a thunderstorm swerve because of anything in its path? Reaching into her alchemical pouch, she removed the other electrum crystal she'd prepared for her suit. She swapped it out, watching through the reaction window as the familiar blue glow set in. She checked her watch. 16 minutes on the clock, give or take a minute or two. She really needed to find a better additive to make the reaction more consistent. With a running leap, she activated the electromagnets in her climbing suit and flung herself at the wall. The ascent here was much faster than outside. Pulling up beside the door she needed, she heard voices filtering through the gap. At least her ears were working again. You should check it. Me? Why should I be the one to check it? Because you're being a baby. They cut the power, so the attacker's probably still in the elevator. Probably. Cilatra fished an aquam cartridge from her belt. Yeah, and if they're not in the elevator, just shoot them or whatever. What if it's like a maintenance worker or something? Come to fix the plumbing. You got native, dude? Cilatra bristled, despite herself, as the guard continued. It's like 1 a.m. Why would it be a plumber? Remember that explosion we felt? You think a plumber did that? Listen, man, pipes back up sometimes. Just go open the door and tell me what you see. Live around Sneppards long enough, and you started picking up their common pheromones. What wafted to Cilatra's nose through the door conveyed fear. Good. She could use that. Footsteps approached the door. Fingers covered in white fur poked through the gap in the doors as the guards slid the doors apart. Reaching out, Cilatra activated the magnet in her glove, yanking the man's rifle towards her. It tugged on his shoulder strap, pulling him towards the opening. His hands clamped down on the doors, and he let out a squeak of terror. Cilatra leaned in, just out of sight of the other guard, and whispered, If you want to live, tell your buddy to come here. Otherwise, I drop you down the shaft. Nod if you understand. The Snepard's eyes went even wider, and he nodded too quickly. What'd you find, Bryce? The other guard called. Bryce didn't stop locking eyes with Cilatra. It's just so... You know how you can see something that just makes you forget how to make words into sentences? I don't have words right now to describe what I'm seeing. You should definitely come take a look, though. It's crazy. You've never seen anything like it. There was a long pause. You're baiting me. I've never baited you. This is not a bait. I just don't know how to describe it. Well, you better try. Bryce gulped, then whispered the words, Please don't kill me. Out loud, he said, So, remember the plumber theory? I think it backed up into the elevator shaft. Another long pause. Bryce, that may be the worst lie you've ever told. You realize we're on the 30th floor, right? I know that, and I realize how it sounds, but there is literally a crazy sewer monster just dripping wet and gross, and it's climbing up the elevator shaft, and its eyes are glowing like it's on Fractal. Cilatra glared at him, and he wilted. The other guards sighed, and Cilatra heard him approach the doorway. All right, newbie. Where's this gross sewer monster that's got you quaking like a Mueller? As the second guard peeked into the shaft, Cilatra shoved the first one back, releasing her magnetic grip on his gun. With practiced motion, she cracked the aquam crystal between her fingers, then imposed her will on the energy, released to spray the approaching guard with frigid water. Reactivating her glove, she grabbed his gun and pulled hard, yanking him into the shaft. Her electromagnets kept the gun from leaving her grip, and he dangled from it for a few moments. Then, despite her sore arm and hand, she swung him towards the elevator and killed power to the magnet in the glove. Both man and gun slipped from her grip and fell a full floor before slamming into the top of the elevator. Deactivating her magnets entirely, Cilatra stepped up onto the 30th floor. The first guard stared past her at the open shaft, eyes wide as moons. His gun had slid off his shoulder and laid beside him, so she kicked it down the shaft. Drawing her catalyst, she leveled it at him. Bryce, was it? He nodded, eyes locked on the end of the bismuth barrel. How many more are up here? She demanded. 2 more, plus the boss. She looked down the hall, which ended at a set of imposing metal double doors. Just in there? He nodded again. Describe the room for me. What? His tail twitched behind him, claws extending from his fingertips and scraping the floor. There's, a big desk. The boss uses it. It's the boss's desk. Sits at the back of the room, by the window. There's a minibar on the left as you walk in. Past that, but also on the left, is a pair of couches and a table and stuff. The guests normally sit there and have a drink with them. There's some chairs set against the right side of the room, and he uses them so people can sit on the other side of his desk sometimes, I guess. Oh, the floor kind of dips down as you enter the room, like a staircase sort of thing, but you have to step back up to get to the same level as the desk. And the guards are probably on the couches, and everyone inside has guns, even the boss. He finished, breathless, then blinked in surprise as she patted him on the head. Good lad. Now stand up. You're going to help me. But I already told you everything that I know, he sputtered. At a gesture with her catalyst, he stood up. Placing a hand on his shoulder, she put the catalyst barrel to his back. I know. Now lead the way. His ears drooped, but he nodded like a disciplined child. Together they walked towards the big double doors. You're the Alchemancer, right? Silatra? The lightning strike? The one who's been killing important people around Cyphus? Thunder clapped outside, punctuating his point. Silatra raised an eyebrow he couldn't see. A snippet that actually knows some Null? That's rare. So you are? She poked him in the back. Keep moving, Kit. The snippered guard's tail drooped to match his ears. He laid both hands on the doors, whimpering. I'm so dead. Not if you cooperate, Silatra sighed, nudging the Kit again. He pushed the doors, and together they entered Lortran's room. Bryce's description had been spot on. Lortran sat in an oversized executive chair, ears barely peeking over the back. He faced a large window, watching the storm. In the near distance, lightning struck the bulb's central spire. On the left, one guard was helping himself to something at the minibar, while the other reclined on a couch. They both tensed as she led Bryce into the room. Hey, boss? The one on the couch asked. They're here. The snipperd in the chair sighed, chin and face resting in his hand, elbow resting on a plush leather arm. Well, shoot 'em then. Do I need to tell everyone around here how to do their job? The guard at the minibar responded this time, hand reaching for a holstered pistol. But they've got the new hire, sir. Oh, you should have opened with that. That obviously changes things. Silatra felt a bit of the tension in her hostage's shoulder release. It does, sir? The guard at the couch slowly drew a pistol of his own, drawing a bead on Silatra. She pulled Bryce a bit closer. Lortran turned his head to the side, looking at his guard. Of course it doesn't, you idiot! The boss's shoulders slumped in a sigh. Spinning his chair, he reached under his desk, detaching something underneath with a loud click. Then he brought it up to rest on the desk. It was a shotgun, which he pointed right at her. Silatra bit down hard on both emergency Aurum cartridges tucked into her cheeks, turning her head to the side to release the energy. She jumped towards the minibar with her hostage in tow, and the expulsion of magic wind helped her close the distance. Every hostile in the room opened fire, but they hadn't anticipated her movement, and their shots went wide. They tried to shoot me, Bryce stammered, seeming genuinely shocked by this, as Silatra dragged him behind cover. Did he not understand who he worked for? He flinched as across the room his boss audibly re-racked the shotgun. Leaning around the inside of the minibar, Silatra saw that it extended to the wall. Hand planted on her former hostage's back, she gave him a shove in that direction. You work for one of the 13. What did you expect? Now keep your head down and stay behind cover if you want to live through this. Raising her catalyst, Silatra peeked out the other way, activating it and directing the electrum burst towards the armed guard closest to the bar. Unfortunately, the burst didn't have enough energy to reach him. Instead, it arced into one of the bar stools, happy for an object to ground itself with. Well, that was a waste of both prism and electrum. The guard raised his handgun, firing at her and forcing her back behind cover. Another shotgun blast tore through the corner of the minibar a second later. Bryce whimpered nearby, pulling almost into the fetal position. Silatra dumped the expended cartridge from her catalyst, reloading with another electrum cartridge. She was down to her last two. They needed to count. Another volley of shots forced her to scoot further behind the bar. Lortran's laugh broke the silence that followed. We got you pinned, Alchemancer! I knew you were a native, but I didn't think you were this sloppy. I expected someone who's taken out 5 of the 13 to be, well, a lot more than you. Turns out, you're just a fractal junkie with fancy toys and a death wish. Silatra growled under her breath. Maybe she wouldn't feel quite so guilty about killing this guy. No, that wasn't true. She would feel it, but she couldn't focus on that. Especially not now. She'd already committed. Reaching out with a booted foot, she gave Bryce a kick. He yelped, sparing her a glance as he drew in tighter on himself. He did his best to avoid looking her in the eyes. She gestured upwards with her nose. Grab me that bottle of whiskey. He looked at it, looked at her, and looked at the loaded catalyst on her lap. With a whimper, he crawled over to the back wall and reached up towards a bottle. Someone fired when his hand appeared, and one of the bottles near him exploded. He yelped, using his arm to shield his face from the shower of glass and alcohol. It smelled like brandy. He looked at her again, but she just gestured more fervently. With a gulp, he clenched and unclenched his fingers. He spared a glance up at the bottles. And closing his eyes, he grabbed the first bottle his hand found. Both guards squeezed shots off this time, shattering more bottles. Crawling over to her, he handed her the bottle he'd grabbed. Silatra took it from him, rolling it over in her hands. The label read as Yorla Red Wine. She sighed. This wouldn't burn the way the whiskey would, but she could still work with this. Sparing a glance around the counter just earned more shots in her direction. The guard at the counter had retreated to stand by his buddy at the couch. Having seen her electrum burst, he wasn't likely to get close enough to allow her a second shot. Fine. She could improvise. Good alchemy required improvisation. Unloading the electrum cartridge, she swapped it for a nectrum cartridge. The deep violet crystal rattled in the chamber as she snapped the catalyst closed. Void magic was incredibly potent, and it didn't take much reactant to create a lot of energy. She'd learned the hard way to never stick that much necrum in her mouth. Placing the barrel over the bottle's cork, she fired. Sickly wisps of purple and black swirled around the catalyst barrel, but she didn't let it dissipate. Instead, she willed it into the wine, giving it a home and a purpose. Traces of it leaked back through the cork, giving the air a pungent scent Silatra had deliberately forsworn. Leaning back, she tossed the bottle over the counter. She grabbed Bryce's shoulder, forcing the terrified guard to make eye contact. As soon as you smell something like a corpse, hold your breath until I vent the room. A corpse? The bottle shattered somewhere in the room. The guards cursed, then started coughing. Yes, this would incapacitate them, but they'd be coughing up blood in seconds. If she didn't hurry, it might kill them. She reloaded her catalyst, this time with an aurum shot. The paper cartridge was like an ordinary aurum crystal, but with a metal pellet fitted at the tip. It lacked the raw stopping power of a firearm bullet, but it was completely silent. The magic was also subtle enough that you'd only notice it if you watched someone pull the trigger. Silatra raised the catalyst as she peeked back around cover. The toxic gas she'd created hovered like a malevolent purple cloud, diffusing into the room. Both guards laid on the floor, hands to their throats, gasping for breath. Doing that would only take more of the stuff into their system. Behind his desk, Lortran wrinkled his nose. Then he started to cough. He tried to raise the shotgun, but a coughing fit ruined his aim and his shot went wide. Silatra kept the catalyst trained on him anyway. Her instructions had been clear. No conventional means. Lortran must be killed by alchemy. Silatra held her breath as she approached the guards. With a snap of her wrist, the magnet in her glove activated, and she used it to snag one of the discarded handguns. It jammed one of her fingers as it snapped to the magnet, and her grunt of pain cost her a bit of breath. Shutting off the flow of electrum, she awkwardly shifted the gun into a more comfortable grip. Then she raised it beside her catalyst and fired. The bullet flew past Lortran, striking the window beyond. Silatra continued to fire until the gun was empty. 4 bullets in total, all into the window. Thousands of little cracks spiderwebbed across the glass. Lortran flinched with each shot, continuing to cough into his arm. Silatra kept the catalyst trained on him, but fished into her pouch for an aurum crystal. She grabbed the larger of the 2 she had left. Approaching the desk, she slammed the crystal against the underside. Crack! Lortran raised the shotgun, so she shot him in the shoulder. She slammed the crystal again. Crack! Now she felt the reaction start. She could feel it seeking release, and gave it shape. A burst of high pressure lifted the desk off the ground, flinging it towards the window and sliding her backwards. The desk's trajectory slammed it into Lortran. The already compromised glass shattered as they hit, and Lortran was carried out into the rain. Lightning struck the bulb's lightning rod, and his thunderclap rolled over Silatra. That made 6 people she'd killed for this. We have them. If you ever want to see them again, follow these instructions exactly. Fail us, and they die. A familiar numbness settled into Silatra's bones, but she was too far down this path to slow down or turn back. Grabbing her last large aurum crystal, she knelt and cracked it against the floor. Then, the roiling emotions of her own heart dragging her down to the very depths of Fanina where murderers belonged, she leapt out the window and let herself fall with the rain. Part 1. Aurum. Chapter 1. Blood on the Streets. 7 of 13 remain. Leo Parsons pulled his car to a stop. He powered down the Fire'em engine, taking a few more moments to enjoy the song on the radio. It was a Jimson classic from before he was born. The song's energetic tones always brought him back to a time when he and his dad would sing along full bore while working on the car over the weekend. The nostalgia was warm, a comfort that always put him in a good mood. Too bad that was about to be dampened by a murder investigation. Sure enough, Leo glanced out the window and caught an eager Tolson waving at him. Yeah, he shouldn't put this off. With a sigh, he tucked a small notepad in his shirt pocket. He grabbed at the pile of pens in his cup holder and noted with annoyance that none of them had a cap anymore. 8 partially used pens, and all of them missing their caps. He selected the one with the least amount of bite marks, testing it on the back of a takeout receipt stuffed in the crack of the passenger seat beside him. Satisfied with the squiggles it made, he slid the pin in beside the notepad. Point up. He didn't need to ruin another shirt. He grabbed his thermos, Fire'em ring on the bottom, keeping the coffee inside at a comfortable warmth. Taking a long sip, he let out a sigh. The song hadn't even reached the bridge yet. Maybe he had time? Checking out the window again, he saw Tolson already walking over. Fine. Glancing at the glove box, Leo weighed whether he really needed to carry his gun. Should he be armed? Probably. Did he trust himself to be? The fact he even needed to ask told him the answer was still no. Besides, there were several dozen officers on scene, all armed. He didn't need to carry today. He rested his hand on the door handle, then paused. Leo looked down at the armrest. This investigation was probably going to take a while. The last thing he needed was to be jittery. He didn't really want to bring the pack of necrosticks with him, but he tucked them inside a jacket pocket anyway. They weren't illegal. The radio cut out as he opened the door and stepped out. Taking another sip of coffee, he shut the door. Then he stretched as Tolson jogged up. The officer's ears were far too perky for this time of day. Well, really for any time before midday. Even Tolson's tail was a little fluffed out. Morning, detective. Leo let out a noise somewhere between a grunt and a sigh. It was time to find words. Morning, Tolson. What are we looking at today? Leo's eyes traveled up the length of Lortran Tower. It was a metal and glass behemoth, ostentatious even by the 13's standards. Large letters on the roof proclaimed Lortran in electrum lights that could be seen from just about anywhere in the bulb. Oh, it's a doozy, Leo. The guy was pushed from the 30th floor, desk and all. Leo sighed. The guy happens to be Lortran Dupal, one of the richest and most influential men in Cyphus. And now he's dead. Oh, super dead, dude. Water splashed around their boots, pooling in the grooves between the metallic panels that made up the street, and slowly draining off to be recycled. The air was humid, but held a pleasant scent, something Leo always appreciated about the day after Storm Day. Any other casualties? A pair of officers deactivated the electrum barrier around the crime scene, allowing Leo and Tolson through. It reactivated with an electric buzz a moment later. Leo tried not to think about the fact that he was standing on a metal street still dotted with puddles of standing water. These barriers were powered with small batteries, designed to be a simple, uncomfortable deterrent to anyone who tried to walk through. Even knowing they were technically safe, he hated the feeling of electricity running around inside his body. It was never pleasant to lose control. Tolson, for his part, was probably so intrigued by the logistics and spectacle of their victim being launched from the building that Leo doubted he'd considered the possibility of additional victims. Tolson was a great officer, with a genuine heart for serving the public. Vanina, Tolson was one of the best snipers Leo knew, but his friend had trouble keeping the jungle in sight for the trees. Tolson shook his head. That's the thing, dude. No other casualties. Same MO as the other murders. Lots of people with electrum burns, a couple with necral overdoses, and one guy that had to be rescued from an elevator. But the only one who actually died was the big man himself. Man, what a way to go, you know? Lortran's desk laid as a splintered mess in the street, having split into at least 4 separate pieces. Several feet away from it was a far grislier mess. Lortran's suit barely contained a heap of gray and white fur stained crimson. The body had several parts at awkward angles, with more than one bone showing. His arms lay broken underneath him. He'd probably succumbed to the instinct to cover his face before hitting the ground, though from a height like that, it wouldn't have made any difference. Leo looked as long as he dared, but turned away when he felt his stomach complain. Standing up, he looked towards the tower. A large number of Lortran's employees were gathered in front of the building. Some were sitting on the metal steps leading up to it, receiving medical attention from pharmatechs. Others wandered through the wet grass beside the steps, or sat on benches underneath some nearby shade trees. That was a lot of witnesses, and it was still far too early in the morning for talking. Taking another sip of coffee, Leo's annoyance grew. He could already feel how light his thermos was. His finger tapped absently against it. Yeah, this was probably going to be a 3 or even 4 tick kind of morning. Ready to do some interviews? Tolson's chipperness would be inspiring if it didn't flood Leo with an irrational anger. They'd known each other forever, gone into similar fields of work so they could stay close. Even so, it took every bit of restraint Leo could muster not to smack the guy. As it was, his claws still flexed on their own, and he forced the anger to exit his body in a long sigh. It still sounded a little too much like a growl. We can always go up and look at the physical evidence first, Tolson said, no stranger to Leo's morning moods. Leo shook his head. Make 2 trips? When I leave that tower, it's going to be to get lunch. We'll see what they have to say, but you may have to do most of the talking so I don't tear anyone's fur out. An hour later, Tolson opened the lobby elevator. You ever think about what we could do if we took Fractal, like, as a force? Leo shot him a glance as they both entered the elevator. That might be the dumbest suggestion I've ever heard you make. Well, I mean, yeah, but that's because we're used to thinking about it like it's a bad thing. Leo knew the truth, but the truth wasn't something he could share, not without life-changing consequences. So he stuck to the answer that the chief had drilled into every officer in the precinct. Because it is a bad thing, dingbat. There's a whole big list of negative side effects involved. Not to mention, it's illegal, and we'd get fired. Tolson pressed the button for the 22nd floor. The elevator doors closed, and the elevator began its ascent. Okay, Leo, but you took witness statements with me. A native running around with glowing multicolored eyes, zapping people, blowing stuff up, and starting fires? What if the stuff gives you superpowers, and we just never realized because we're taught drugs equal bad? If I knew that glowy eyes could let me breathe fire, I'd try it. You're forgetting we did try it, idiot, back in college. We had to call an ambulance because you started having seizures. It gave me the worst migraine, too, enough to convince me not to try it a second time. Except, he had tried it again. But that was his secret to take to his necral-scented grave. Medics use it. Medics use shimmer because it's low concentration medical grade. Gives you no more of an alertness buzz than my coffee. Suddenly reminded of the thermos in his hand, Leo raised it to his lips. He tipped it back to take a drink, but only got a few drops. He lowered it with a sigh. But it doesn't give you magic wizard powers. How else are you going to explain how the native tore up the place last night? Leo rolled his eyes. By examining the evidence they left behind, and using logic to find the truth behind what happened last night. Tolson shrugged, and the next few floors passed quietly. Then he grinned. Bet you lunch, it's magic! Leo stared back at his friend. You're so stupid sometimes. As you very kindly pointed out repeatedly for our entire elevator date, but I'm chasing away the pain of your negativity by reminding myself that no one in all of Cyphus is grumpier than you in the mornings. I think you just need to be reminded that you're loved. Tolson opened his arms, beckoning in with his hands. Bring it in, buddy. Leo regarded the larger man. His friend had already developed a dad bod, despite both of them being mid-20s and single. It didn't help that Tolson had a good 6 inches on Leo, even without counting his ears. Leo's tail flicked the wall of the elevator. No. Well, if you won't come to the hug's coming to you. Leo tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go in an elevator. His friend wrapped him in an embrace, one he eventually returned with a sigh. Okay, fine. Maybe I needed that. Everyone does from time to time. Leo's eyes glanced up at the display. He pushed off his friend. And that's enough. We're almost to our floor. You're running pretty stressed these days, dude. Your left ear likes to sag, and your tail's always fritzed out at the end. Everything good at home? Even just thinking about the stack of untouched mail on his counter, the barren state of his refrigerator, or the unanswered messages on his phone made Leo want to light a necro stick right here in the elevator. His hands hadn't stopped jittering since he ran out of coffee. But he told Tolson he was going to quit, and he didn't want to give the man any further cause to worry about him. Ironic that Tolson had just been the one to suggest they try one of the strongest mind-altering drugs on the market in the hope that they granted wizard-like superpowers. Leo faked a smile. Yeah, everything's same as it's always been. The doors parted with a soft ding, opening to a floor full of officers searching for and categorizing evidence. One of the officers approached, and Leo's blood pressure spiked. His fist slammed into the button to shut the doors again. Tolson, however, grabbed the doors with one hand and pushed Leo out the elevator with the other. He leaned in and whispered, "You can't hide from Melissa forever." You know, Tolson, that sounds like quitter talk. I can, and will hide from Melissa until the day either she or I switch precincts. Dude, you've got to talk to her sooner or later. I choose later, then, Leo hissed as she walked up. Detective Parsons. Her voice was cold as snow season. Hard to believe there had ever been a time where it had been warm. Detective McKinley. Tolson raised his hand, pointing at himself. Officer Gray. Melissa raised an eyebrow at him. The tips of her ears didn't even reach his shoulders, but she fixed him with such a stare that his whiskers twitched. Tolson was friendly with everyone, even judgmental academy flings. But it was no more possible to dampen Tolson's mood than it was to get Detective Melissa McKinley to give up a grudge. She turned her gaze back to Leo. Surprised to see you up and walking around, Parsons. I thought bloodsuckers slept in coffins during the day. There was no humor to the way her tail sliced the air behind her. Leo brought a hand up to pinch the bridge of his nose. Can we not do this today, Melissa? Sure. Fine. I'm not the one who has trouble communicating professionally. She said the last part with a bit of a snort. Her whiskers twitched as she struggled to keep the snarl from clawing its way onto her face. Leo bit down the response that came to mind. Things might have been different now if he had been able to do that several years ago. Instead, he let out a sigh, pretended to take a sip of coffee. Beside him, Tolson cleared his throat. So, shall we take a look at what happened? Melissa's teeth audibly connected as she also swallowed whatever her first response was. Shaking her head, she let out a sigh. Yeah, we should get to work. Awesome, Tolson said, falling in behind her as she started down the hall. Hey, so where'd that desk on the street come from? Leo watched them go, noting the stiffness in Melissa's form that he seemed to cause with just his mere presence. She was as pretty as she'd always been, and she was an excellent detective. But that Electrum train had long since left the station. Well, more accurately, he'd grounded that train himself. His hand pulled out the pack of neck rolls and prepped a stick before he even realized. He'd almost brought it to his lips before he caught himself. With great effort, he pushed the stick back into the pack with his thumb. The craving was loud, his fingers twitching. Yet the last thing he needed was for her to see he hadn't broken the habit. She'd been able to give them up, but she was also a stronger person than he was. Sliding the pack back into a jacket pocket, Leo channeled the jitters into productive motion and started walking. Best we can tell, this room was the point of entry, Detective McKinley said. Glass crunched beneath her boots as she carefully wound her way to the center of the room. Tolson let out a low whistle, grabbing the frame and peering out the broken window. How'd she get up here? Window cleaning suit, probably. There's an occupation that takes some guts. Leo peeked into the small office, eyes taking in as much of the scene as he could focus on, despite the itch at the back of his mind. Tolson leaned out a bit further, and Melissa stiffened even more. Tolson, do you have to stand so close to the ledge? I don't want the guys below to have to scrape you off the street, too. You realize he's going to take that as a challenge, right? Leo asked, fingers tapping the side of his leg. Tolson grinned, but stepped away from the window. Not sure why you're worried. Sneppards always land on their feet. Tell that to Lortrin, Leo mused, noting an evidence tag next to a small metal canister by the wall. He knelt down to get a closer look. The tip had been chewed off, and whatever had been inside was gone. There was a faint residue clinging to the inside that glinted, almost like specks of glitter. Well, the witnesses had all agreed. The killer's eyes had been glowing like she was on fractal. That's what I mean, Tolson said, grin widening. Lortrin did land on his feet. His feet just, shattered on impact. Melissa let out a groan. The man is dead, Officer Gray. I know it's hard for you two, but try to show some respect. Tolson's hand shot to his forehead in salute. Yes, ma'am. Not to me, idiot. Leo walked to another evidence tag. This one marked some russet fur in the carpet fibers. Sneppards had white fur with gray and black spots. The canid featured Knolves, on the other hand, tended to have fur in various shades of brown and black. They already knew a native was the killer. Again, the witnesses' stories had agreed. A Nolf of indeterminate age, with feminine build and voice, typical Nolfin accent, close to 6 feet in height, eyes glowing with a prismatic spread, and a weapon that shot lightning in a way no Electrum taser ever could. Same description they'd run into every time they got called in to investigate the death of one of the 13. This was her 6th victim. 7th, if you counted the guard who'd been shot during the attack on the Minister of Commerce. He cut off Tolson's reply by asking Melissa directly. So she entered through the window, scattering everything on the desk, and then what? Melissa's tail swished as she exited the room. At her gesture, Leo followed. She dropped the first guard right here, with some kind of electrum discharge. She pointed at a nearby evidence tag. There's electrum crystal fragments there, but no battery casing for it. Alchemy? Tolson asked, voice rising to the same pitch as a kid receiving a present. Leo sighed. Alchemy is something medics practice and factory workers do to make batteries. People don't use alchemy to attack other people. We have guns for that. Melissa grimaced, prompting Leo to speak again. Oh, come on, Detective McKinley, he corrected himself. Don't tell me you're going to side with Tolson on this. I know you're obsessed with disagreeing with me on principle, but you know I'm right. Her whiskers bunched together as she scrunched up her nose. Her ears flattened a bit, but not from aggression. Normally, I would agree with you, and as with other techs, it's been easy to write it off as some kind of special taser or experimental weapon, but the evidence from last night, it's odd. Like making grenades from things that should be too small to be grenades, odd. Or weaponizing steam, despite shutting off power to the sprinklers beforehand. Not to mention, she launched a desk the size of most dining room tables out a window with enough force for it to land in the street nearly 200 feet away from the building. She didn't just toss it against the window like someone tossing a chair. She launched it. Tolson's eyes were aglow. That's amazing. The reverence in his tone was that of a child being shown a water park for the first time. It's unnatural, Melissa corrected, before walking down the hall and gesturing for both of them to follow. Regardless, best we can tell, after incapacitating the guard here, she broke into this floor's electrical closet and took the active batteries. According to the janitor, she took the spares, too. Any chance she's using the electrum batteries for her weapon? Leo asked. Melissa shrugged. Could be, but there's crystalline fragments left behind everywhere she used it. Not sure how she would have gotten the casing off a battery so quickly. That, or electrum batteries are inherently more dangerous than I realized. Most batteries tend to have pretty low power ratings anyway, so that way the average snap doesn't electrocute himself or combust while changing a light bulb, Tolson mused. This earned him a look from both detectives. What? He asked, raising his hands in a shrug. I loved science in school. They rounded a corner into a large seating area. All three wrinkled their noses at the same time. The burned husk of something vaguely couch-shaped sat off at an odd angle. Several nearby walls had holes or dents. Melissa pointed at the couch. According to the guards, she tried to sneak up on them in the dark, but they saw her, so she took cover behind the couch. When they got close, she set the thing on fire. I'm not talking just lit a corner of it. They said the couch burst into flames all at once, from the bottom up. Her finger pointed at several different evidence tags. We found shattered remnants of a firing crystal, again with no battery casing, including a chunk as big as my fist over there. She held up a finger, but that's only half of it. After that, she threw something at them that exploded like a grenade. Once again, no metal casing left behind, just large chunks of a light brown crystal. Aurum? Tolson offered. Yeah, probably. How many guards? Leo asked, trying to find any topic that could distract from the itch. He flexed his claws, using the motion to keep his hand from traveling to his jacket. He could almost taste the stick. 3 encountered her here, counting for that dent, that hole. Third one didn't hit a wall, so she zapped him instead. Leo glanced back at the couch, noticing the evidence tag calling out scuffs on the floor. The couch had been scooted several feet by the explosion. Based on the dent whichever poor guard had left in the elevator door, yeah, this was something more than a concussive grenade. That frightened him, and not just because it might cost him lunch. She walked them through the rest of the areas of importance. There was another discarded bottle in the elevator, presumably fractal. She pointed out where the killer had climbed into the elevator shaft when Lortrin's men had killed power to it. Lortrin's office was a war zone by comparison to the rest of the tower. The minibar on the side had numerous bullet holes, and several different alcohols pooled together on the floor. Broken glass littered the wall and floor in that area. And finally, the back window. There was no glass inside. It had certainly burst outward. Okay. Please tell me she broke the glass by throwing the desk into it. Tolson was nearly bouncing in place. Melissa sighed. We're not sure yet. With as many shots as were fired in here, it's possible the glass was compromised first. Or maybe she just launched it with enough force that the desk itself broke the window. There was a sizable chunk of brown crystal left over where the desk probably used to be. It's similar to the one from downstairs, but larger. Tolson bounded over to the window, ears folding back against the top of his head as he peeked over the edge. He was peering down over the end of his nose, as if that would help him not lose his balance. Melissa's gaze returned to Leo. What do you think? What he thought was that if he had to go another minute without smoking a necrol stick, his thumb would wear through the spot at his hips he was rubbing to keep his hand busy. But he couldn't tell her that. He sighed. I think I'm gonna have to buy Tolson lunch today. She raised an eyebrow at this. Because? It's probably alchemy, which means we are way out of our depth. She nodded. That's an understatement, Detective. The formality stung, but he was too distracted to care. She continued. I told the chief as much, and apparently he sent for an expert. The elevator door dinged, and both detectives looked towards it. An officer stepped up, escorting a native? Her long legs, dark fur, bushy tail, and slender canid snout immediately identified her as a Nulf. She was an adult, though Leo had no idea how to tell how old she was. She towered over the officer escorting her, and looked to rival Tolson for height. Maybe he had some Nulf heritage somewhere that no one knew about, though the concept of slender was certainly missing from his genetics. The woman was dressed in a sharp red jacket that hugged her relatively slim figure. It was missing sleeves, exposing dark arms that transitioned from russet fur at the elbows to charcoal at the fingertips. Various crimson feathers were pinned decoratively to her chest and in her hair, which ran down ungathered just past her shoulders. She clutched to a large bag that threatened to upset her balance, and her eyes had the look of a scared rabbit. Officer Broadstone, who is this? Melissa stepped forward and folded her arms. She looked the newcomer up and down with a disapproving eye. Broadstone saluted, earning an eye roll from Melissa and a grin from Tolson. Chief said to introduce her to the detectives. Said she's the expert witness he found. Someone who can help with, alchemy. He said the last word, as if speaking it aloud would draw some curse upon him. Melissa blinked. Apparently, she hadn't been expecting the chief to send a native, either. She recovered quickly. Excellent. Well then, let me introduce Detective Leo Parsons, head detective on this case. Turning, she gestured to Leo like she was introducing royalty. Before he could interject, she continued, Please direct all questions to him. He'll be delighted to help you. The woman tilted her head, but acknowledged Leo with a slight nod. Her eyes were starting to lose their nervousness, and she gained a slight smile. It was almost like she'd peered right through him, into the secrets he hid even from himself. Or maybe she'd just seen his picture from that unforgivable time he'd made the news. Leo cleared his throat. Detective McKinley, shouldn't you... Melissa cut him off by literally walking away. She called back over her shoulder, not so much as even looking at the native. I've got to check in with some of the other officers and see what they've found. Officer Broadstone, would you like to come help me with that thing? Now's a good time, I assume? The officer looked more relieved than if someone had told him he'd been cured of some disease. He nodded eagerly and fell into step with the detective. Melissa stepped into the elevator, then had the audacity to wave as the doors closed. And had that been a wink? Just like that, Leo was left alone with Tolson and the chief's supposed expert. She stood there, one hand on the bag's strap and the other on the flap keeping it closed. Looking between the two officers left in the room, her smile stayed, though she looked like a child entering a new school on the first day of class. Detective? Her accent was a light thing, springing from her mouth. Her gaze, however, was suddenly sharp and focused, whiskers twitching at the end of her too long nose. I'm sorry, what was your name? Leo hadn't had any more coffee for almost an hour. He was just as far past when his body was telling him it needed a necral fix, and it was slowly sinking in that Melissa had just forced him to wait even longer by dumping this native in his lap. She knew what she was doing. She had to know the torture he was being put through right now. He forced the best smile he could muster for that awful period of time that existed prior to midday. Leo Parsons. He thumbed over his shoulder. This is Officer Tolson Gray, and you are... Naira. I'm a teaching alchemist at the university. Leo's eyebrow shot up before he realized that was rude. Naira, he prompted. Do you have a last name? He shook her head. No, sir. I'm a rescue. Leo should have guessed that. Instead, he opened his mouth and inserted his foot past the ankle. Of course she would be a rescue, an orphan rescued from outside the bulb. She wouldn't know her parents. He had meant it as a polite nicety, something to hopefully push this conversation along so that he could go smoke. Instead, he was saying dumb things because he was distracted. Thankfully, Tolson saved him. You teach alchemy? There was that wholesome eagerness again. So much like a kid, but in the good way that filled your heart with warm fuzzy stuff. It almost helped Leo ignore the additional burden that had just been left to become his problem. Naira nodded, readjusting her bag on her shoulder. I do. Like, actual alchemy? Making raw crystals and stuff? He took a step closer with each question, eyes traveling down to her bag. She rotated protectively, as if shielding the bag's contents with her own body, but she nodded again. Yes, sir. It is just simple chemistry. And magic? The words tripped out of Tolson. Her smile grew a bit at that. And magic, she repeated. Leo reached up to pinch at his nose. Lunch couldn't come fast enough. Chapter 2. A real drossy day. The school library. Place of learning, hangout spot for after-class necrals, and, most importantly, the public canvas for self-expression. Selecting an empty spot of brick wall, Moira Dolahan unshouldered her backpack and dug around her books for the cans of spray paint she'd hidden at the bottom. Today was a good day for green and orange. Their natural clash would make her feel better. The cans rattled as she took one in each hand and gave them vigorous shakes. Leading with green, she started tracing out the letter K. Normally, she made her artistic signature on the smaller side. But today, she felt like taking up the whole wall. Well, as much as she could reach, so just barely onto the window. School was lucky she wasn't taller. Though to be honest, the paint would probably wash off easier from the glass. Most of the high schoolers here were too well off to get into trouble publicly. Her peers had the decency to make out in closets, or do fractal behind the privacy of a bathroom stall, so that the school's reputation as a place of higher learning and prestige would go untarnished. There was an unspoken understanding between the students and the faculty. If you're gonna get into trouble, do it where no one will see, so it doesn't reflect on the school. If it does reflect on the school, expect your parents to pay one fanina of a fine to make up for it. Technically, her mother was still on the school board, though she hadn't attended a meeting in over a year. It gave Moira a lot of leeway, which was equal parts invigorating and frustrating. She could get away with a lot, but what did it matter if she continued to be forgotten? So, when she reached the last letter of her signature, she kept the spray can nozzle depressed, trailing a line of neon orange all the way to the edge of the building. The line cut across a half-dozen painted hearts and sets of initials declaring eternal love for relationships that would certainly die before midterms. She cut across other signatures and works of art that normally she would admire. Today, she didn't care. Today was supposed to be her day. And so far, not a single person had remembered except for her driver. Last week, the school had made a public announcement for the principal's stupid kid, but somehow Moira must have just slipped through the cracks. She didn't stop at the edge of the building. Instead, she wrapped around, continuing the line on the bricks with her green paint while letting the orange come down to add some personality to the bushes. Seriously, how hard was it for people to remember one day out of the year? It wasn't like her mother had any other kids to keep track of. No one was in sight as she came around the front of the building. Any part of campus that even hinted at providing education was always vacant when lunchtime rolled around. Again, if you wanted to find someone that wasn't in the cafeteria, start checking closets, bathrooms, and dumpsters. Just be prepared for the mental and emotional scars of finding a classmate high as a kite or tongue deep in someone that loved them. Seed mother, Moira hated her peers. She couldn't wait to be an adult and get away from such stupidity. Moira lit up on the paint as she ran into someone else's artwork. This piece of artistic expression featured a cartoonish brown and black dog clearly modeled after a Nulf. It was on all fours, a trail of yellow paint leading from its legs to disappear behind the bushes. A large red slash crossed out the picture, and underneath had been written, "Dogs belong outside." Moira's day had already been soured when her mother couldn't be bothered to even leave a note. Now her blood was boiling. Yeah, people didn't get along in Cyphus, but that didn't mean her generation needed to be part of the problem. Shame on her kind. If she was lucky, maybe whoever had drawn this had overdosed in the men's room and rid the world of their own filth. No matter what was popular in the bulb, Moira would never be convinced that Sneppards and Nulfs weren't equals. Yes, they were two different species, but they were both people. You could be blind and still see that. At least, that was how things should be. This wasn't art. This was unwelcome hatred that had no business being allowed to live. Lifting both spray cans, Moira set to work covering over the degrading picture. Her ears perked up, and some part of her brain registered the sound of the library door opening. She heard approaching footsteps, but she was so angry she kept spraying. No one else had bothered to fix this, so she would. "Hey," an adult called. "What are you doing?" "Making the world a better place," Moira muttered as she buried the offensive piece under a zigzag pattern of green and orange. A hand clamped on her arm. Glancing up at the person so rudely encroaching on her personal space, she saw the agitated face of one of the school's half-dozen useless librarians. "This is vandalism, Miss Dolahan." "No," Moira said. "This is community service." She gestured at the still showing hind legs, stream of urine, and politically vogue but morally heinous declaration of "dogs belong outside." Snarling her disgust, Moira asked, "Is this really the kind of thing you want us to be learning in this fanina hole of a school?" The librarian's whiskers twitched on her polka-dotted face. Her hair looked dyed because it wasn't quite the same shade of gray as the rest of her fur. Her uniform was bland and kosher, the school colors of white and red. Either she ironed it every 10 minutes, or she didn't do any actual work, lest she risk creasing it. Sneppards already had a superiority complex because they had 10 times the population, 5 times the average wages, and infinitely more political and judicial representation than their bulb mates, the Nulfs. Get them a lifetime position in a school for the wealthy, and they got even worse. "The problem before me is you, Miss Dolahan." "No. The problem is adults like you who refuse to be responsible for the things you say and the beliefs you hold. Why don't you train our generation to be better?" The woman closed her eyes and narrowed her gaze. "Then let's start with you." No one wanted to look at the real problems. No one ever listened to Moira. Seed mother, she wanted to like people, but why were so many of them so stupid? Miss Do-Gooder Librarian hauled Moira off to the principal's office and filled his head with all sorts of lies about how she'd caught Moira in the act of hiding her own racist graffiti. "Miss Dolahan, are we going to have to enroll you in social studies again?" the principal asked, once it was just her and him in his office. I didn't draw it, Moira said, her jacket crinkling as she folded her arms across her chest. Oh, we have a witness who says you did. Then she's bracking deaf and blind. I was painting over it because it was offensive and rude and awful. The principal, a rather lanking sneppered specimen whose spots had nearly faded to white, held up an arthritic hand. I would ask you to watch your language, Miss Dolahan. Well, I'd ask you to actually listen to your students, and then maybe they wouldn't need to swear to get your bracking attention. The principal's eyelids drooped as he became another name in the ever-growing list of adults in her life that Moira had disappointed. He could suck dross. She knew that she had the moral high ground. The librarian informed me that your little paint job circled the building. Oh. Yeah, that part had been selfish, and more of a venting session than any sort of moralistic public service. Moira winced, then decided to own the truth. It does. I was not in a good mood. The principal sighed. Miss Dolahan, what would your mother think? Honestly, I'd love to ask her, but she's been so busy the last couple months she hasn't found the time to fit me into her schedule. Your home life should have no bearing on your school life, Miss Dolahan. If you require counseling, one can be provided. I don't need counseling. I need to survive the next 3 months, give this place both middle fingers, and kiss you and all the little anima spawn you're training here goodbye. The principal started tapping his skeletal fingers together, his claws starting to show from his agitation. You realize that with your behavior today, you're going to have to spend the rest of your birthday in detention. Someone had noticed. Now the bracker was just trying to use it to manipulate her into surrendering to the system. So your kid gets a public announcement and cake served on his birthday, but mine gets overlooked until I'm behind closed doors? We Sneppards really have a firm grasp on this whole equality thing, don't we? His fingers pressed together so firmly, she thought several of them would snap. I'm going to have to report this to your mother. Ironically, that was exactly what Moira wanted, even if she knew it wouldn't do anything. The principal continued. I'll have to speak with her about correcting this rebellious behavior. Moira let out a derisive snort. She hasn't said more than 5 words to me in the past month, so good luck with that. Through a strained smile, the principal said, We'll see. The rest of her chewing out was full of a bunch of platitudes that didn't actually touch on any serious issues. The ultimate takeaway? According to the school, spraying bricks with washable paint and speaking up for yourself and others were far worse crimes than anti-Nulf propaganda in a place where they already had zero representation. So, in trying to hold her fellow students to higher standards, Moira was the bad guy. Detention involved a chalkboard and writing the phrase, I will not deface school property or cuss at faculty, until her wrist felt like it was going to fall off. She used up 2 entire pieces of chalk, and the fur on her fingers was caked with the stuff. It blended with the natural fur color, but the feel of it was more annoying than the look. Over an hour after the rest of the school was dismissed, a knock came at the door, and another Sneppard faculty member stuck her head in. Miss Dolahan, your mother was unavailable for meeting today, so you're being released. Your driver is waiting for you outside. Outside the building, or outside the front gate? The woman's polite smile stiffened. The front gate, obviously. My legs are tired from walking back and forth in front of this chalkboard. I'd like my driver to pick me up right in front of the building today. I'm quite sure your legs are just fine. You're still standing after... Before she could finish, Moira dropped to a seated position on the ground. I'm so tired from being such a good little student. I don't think I can walk out to the gate. Miss Dolahan, school policy requires your driver to wait at the gate. Other students get picked up at the building. Why do they get special treatment? Because other students use accredited drivers. Moira glared up at the woman. It's incredible how all of you could spew such dross straight out of your mouths and not throw up. Sergei has a valid driver's license and is fully accredited according to Cyphus regulations. She knew this game and had tested its limits on multiple occasions. Normally she walked, but she was in a bad enough mood today that she was willing to throw a few swings. The school policy does not allow nulfs on campus grounds. Narrowing her eyes, Moira watched to see if the woman would betray any kind of remorse or discomfort at reciting such an asinine and awful line. There was no remorse, just a look of agitation at having to deal with a troublemaking child. So, because he's bigger than you, his nose and ears are longer than yours, and his fur is brown and black instead of white and gray, that's sufficient grounds to deny him access? Even when he meets all the relevant qualifications to come pick me up with a service that I'm positive my mother has paid for? The thin line of this woman's lips turned down into a frown. Miss Dolahan, if we start making exceptions, others will follow suit. Moira rolled her eyes. Right, because the streets of Cyphus are just teeming with Nulfin drivers. Yeah, you're right. I'm going to start a revolution by seeking for me and my driver to be treated like everyone else in your little inclusive school. Throw whatever tantrum you like. Your driver is waiting at the gate. I've done my job, and I've no need or desire to encourage your ridiculous behavior. And just like that, the brave little woman standing up for Cyphus took off down the hall, the heels on her pretentious shoes clicking as she fled. With a sigh, Moira got back to her feet and scooped up her bag. Her father had a saying, if you want the world to be a better place, start with yourself, then work on the world. Understand it will be work, but if you give up, it will never happen. Now that Dad was gone, her mother parroted that often. However, she only quoted the last bit about not giving up. Moira clung to the whole thing, and she would live it far better than her mother ever could. She owed it to her dad. She owed it to Sergei, who had probably been waiting at the gate for far too long. It wasn't fair to make his day Fanina just because hers had been such a disaster. Rubbing her hands together produced a cloud of white. With a smirk, she slapped her hand against the chalkboard, leaving a nice series of white outlines from the pads of her hands. It was in the corner of the chalkboard, and if they really wanted to make her come clean it off in the morning, it was just more of the school's time wasted. It took about 10 minutes to walk to the front gate. Despite the festering lemon taste of her mood, it was impossible not to smile when she spotted Sergei. Sergei, her butler, her driver, her best friend. Sergei stood beside a parked hover car that was only 6 months old. Moira had asked for a new one, expecting her mother to finally put her foot down and engage in conversation with her, rather than just throw money at her to keep her quiet and happy. It was a waste of money and of time, but Sergei had admitted to finding the legroom in this model more comfortable than in previous ones, and he never asked for things, so it fell to Moira to pay careful attention to even his passing comments. She loved Sergei, but even he fell victim to the bulb's expectations that a Nulf should be grateful for anything that was given to them, regardless of consideration for basic people's rights. He waved as she approached, stepping over to open the back door for her. The door handle disappeared in his grasp, unsurprising considering that the car's roof only came up to his armpits. Old enough to be her father, Sergei was a behemoth of a Molfen man, standing closer to 7 feet tall than most of his kind, with the build of a professional wrestler. He used part of his off hours to maintain his physique, a habit Moira assumed had formed during his childhood in response to being bullied. Anytime she tried to get him to talk about his personal history with Snippards, he simply shrugged it off and stated that both sides have treated me well at times, and both sides have treated me poorly. I do not begrudge either, as there are plenty of those in the bulb who have it far rougher than I. That was dumb. Other people having it bad didn't negate how bad he had it. Yes, Moira's mother was one of the few business Snippards in Cyphus who preferred to hire based on character rather than the physical appearance one was born with, but even her good intentions couldn't ensure that he was treated as an equal by the rest of her staff. Hence, it fell to Moira to remind him constantly that he was her equal. Of course, that got undermined almost immediately by his formal bow as he held the door for her. We've been over this, Sergei. I don't want you feeling like you have to open the door for me. I'm a big girl, and my wrist can take the strain of opening a car door. A small smile crept onto his canid muzzle, giving her a glimpse of incredibly white teeth. Of that, I have no doubt, Miss Moira. Rest assured, it is my delight to get the door for you. Her mother required a certain level of presentation from her employees. That was at least the original reason for the custom extra large suit Sergei wore, and the well-trimmed chin fur that he shaped into a regal point. But the gleaming cufflinks, the thrice-pressed crease line running the length of his pant legs, the conditioned orange and black fur that smelled like eucalyptus and felt softer than a stuffed animal, and the pristine teeth, those were all Sergei and his constant personal commitment to looking his finest, no matter the circumstance. She'd seen him wear that suit to a beach party. Not the real beach, obviously, as Cyphus wasn't even close to any oceans. No, this had been a party at a neighbor's place, where they had imported sand to surround their personal swimming pool. The best part? When Moira had dared him to jump into the pool, he had. It'd taken him several hard days' work to save the suit, but he hadn't begrudged her for it. He'd said it was worth it to put such a smile on her face. "Is everything all right, miss?" Sergei asked, pulling her abruptly from her nostalgia trip. Seed mother. She was reminded yet again how remarkably kind his face was. How could anyone look at a person like Sergei and write him off as a savage? With a quick nod, she tossed her bag in the back seat. "Sorry to make you wait so long." "It was no trouble, Miss Moira." A scowl started growing out of her face, and she turned to glare at the oppressive iron bars walling off the prison that was her high school. "I told them to give you a pass so you could pick me up in front of the building, but they didn't listen." "That is most thoughtful, but I do not mind waiting outside the gate. As you can see, I don't really have to fight anyone for prime parking." He gave her a wink, and her heart sank 2 inches lower in her chest. "You're also not willing to fight anyone for it, which is part of the problem. You can't just let people walk all over you, Sergei." "Of course not, Miss Moira." Despite her desire to give him a lecture on the spot, it would be nothing he hadn't heard at her hands 100 times. And truthfully, she was worn out from her terrible day. With a sigh, she resigned to return to his tendency to roll over, later, and climbed in the back seat. Sergei shut the door with gentleness that belied his size. Wasn't even his property, and he still fretted over it. Climbing in the front, Sergei powered on the hovercar's repulsors. The car sagged in his direction, a necessary consequence of him being at least 3 times Moira's mass, but he adjusted the compensators quickly. The plush interior made it hard to hear the car's thrusters kick in, but she was only gently pressed back against her seat as he pulled away. They'd made it about a block when he called back to her. "Was it a good birthday, miss?" Rolling her eyes, Moira scooted forward to rest her arms across the windowsill between them. "No, Sergei. School was dross. People at school were dross, too. I had to listen to the principal lecture me on appropriate behavior for an entire bracking hour. So no, my birthday's just drowning in dross right now." She let her chin sink into the poofy sleeves of her jacket with a snort of frustration. To his credit, Sergei did not comment on her use of foul language. He knew better. "Well, on the bright side, school day is done, which leaves the remainder of the day to make up for it." "Right, because Mom definitely remembered what day it is. There's totally going to be all sorts of stuff waiting to cheer me up back at home." Her eyes rolled so far around her head, there was danger of them rolling out of her skull. Sergei waited too long to respond, which was confirmation enough. "She's been most busy these last few weeks, but I myself snuck a reminder for today into her planner." Moira snorted into her sleeves again. She shouldn't need a reminder. "Perhaps not, though not all adults are gifted with such attention for others as you are, Miss Moira. Don't excuse her poor mothering. I'm just trying to take the middle ground. I know," Moira sighed. "I thought you were on my side, Sergei." Shooting her a sidelong glance, he reassured her. "I am on your side, Miss Moira." "Then stop defending Mom." "The problem with that is that I like you both very much, and would very much enjoy seeing the two of you get along like you used to." "I'm not the one who doesn't get along anymore." "But you are the one causing trouble for attention." A growl settled in Moira's throat, and she buried her entire face in her sleeves. "I don't know what they told you, but I promise it's not what happened." She heard him give a particularly potent swallow, then wait several long seconds before saying in a measured but still pleasant tone, "They said you brought your paints to school." A horrible thought occurred to Moira then, a conclusion he surely must have jumped to on his own. Panic swelled in her voice, sudden courage unburying her nose and bringing her eyes up to look at him. Some dipdross tagged the library with extremely inappropriate stuff, but it wasn't me. It's repulsive behavior, so I did cipher as a public service and painted over it. Then, because I tried to get rid of that dross, I'm the one who got blamed and forced into detention for misbehaving. His tone didn't change when next Sergei spoke, but she knew him well enough to see the relief settling into his features. He probably hadn't believed whatever they'd told him, but he'd wanted to be sure. Sometimes, doing the right thing can still get one in trouble. Even so, when that happens, there is great comfort in the fact that at the end of the day, you did the right thing. At least someone appreciates it, Moira muttered, bringing her chin back down to rest on her arms. The right thing is not right because someone appreciates it, nor is it right because someone even sees it. True courage is found in doing the right thing for its own sake. It makes me glad to see you growing in courage, Miss Moira. Growing? I've got courage spilling out of my ears, Sergei. You should have heard me in front of the principal. I called him out on his double standards to his face. Same with that sniveling, terrible librarian with the awful hair and clumpy fur. Oh, and the stupid detention guard. Teacher? Same thing. As the ride continued on, Moira felt her mood lightening. Sergei had a way of lifting her spirits, no matter how terrible her day. He was about the only one in the house who could, since her father... She forced a breath. No sense in letting that memory spoil the moment. She stuffed it back in the mental box where her mother wanted her to keep it, and forced herself back into the present. No, this was her birthday, and all the stupid people in her life could go straight to Fanina. Moira was going to enjoy herself. Sergei, did you mean to miss our turn? Oh, I wanted to make a quick stop before we go home. She eyed him with suspicion. Sergei, the man who could fit every possession he wanted into a single suitcase, and who never did anything extraneous, wanted to make an unscheduled stop when she was already late because of detention? Where are we going? That's not the important question, Miss Moira, he said, giving her a conspiratorial wink. No? Then what is? As they turned the next corner, a familiar building came into view. Probably Moira's third favorite building in the entire bulb. A large display board depicted a waffle cone the size of a truck, with a scoop of ivory goodness threatening to spill out of its crunchy confines. The question, Miss Moira, is today a chocolate kind of birthday, or a strawberry one? She could feel her eyes widening, her cheeks stretching of their own accord. Both, obviously. His grin grew in response to her own, and he nodded. Very good, Miss Moira. Both it shall be. Okay. Maybe this birthday wasn't gonna be total dross.